Coming up, a conversation with former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, moderated by Kevin Guskowitz.
Well, good afternoon. I think it's officially almost 12:01. We can say good afternoon. But I'm Kevin Guskowitz, president at Michigan State University, and I have the great honor today of having a fireside chat with former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. Also, as many of you know, Mayor Pete, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, for 8 years. And I mentioned Secretary Buttigieg that I was on the treadmill this morning and saw that South Bend, Indiana was going to get 18, 20 inches of snow today. So welcome to sunny Detroit.
It's tropical.
But we're excited to have the Secretary here today, and we're going to talk a lot about advancements in transportation, safety, efficiency, and the future of mobility, something that at Michigan State we're very excited about, doing a lot of research in this area. But so we bring together today at the Auto Show researchers, industry leaders, policymakers, and the public around this issue as we're thinking about the future of mobility. And so we had a chance to talk last week. I know your parents are and we're academics, university professors, and love to hear your thoughts a little bit about the role that universities, research universities across the U.S. and certainly here in Michigan have in advancing these technologies, but how they work, should be working in a partnership with government. And you certainly played an important role for 4 years in the federal administration. And so your thoughts as we kick it off.
Well, yeah, and thanks for the chance to be with you, and many thanks to our hosts at the Detroit Auto Show. Very excited to be back here in tropical Detroit. I have so much respect for the work that you do. I may have sought the American presidency, but I would never do a job as politically sensitive as being a university president in America right now. So I know the pressures that you're under. And at the same time, part of that is because everybody understands just how much is at stake, I think, in the trajectory of research and of education that is playing out at America's great research universities like Michigan State University. And from my vantage point, both as mayor of the city of South Bend, where we tried to better use the presence of a world-class university in our backyard, to my role as Secretary of Transportation, where I saw the bleeding edge of U.S. innovation, which of course has so much to do with transportation, I came to believe in a sort of a three-part handshake or a three-legged stool between industry, academia, and government. And I think far too often people talk about whether innovation will come from government or whether it'll come from industry, as if it's an either-or. In reality, industry is so good at taking technologies, developing them, and bringing them to market. But while industry can generate a lot of multi-billion-dollar ideas, often the trillion-dollar ideas, like the invention of the internet, for example, or space travel, just can't happen without public support. And that kind of public support also can't only happen in-house, so to speak. It doesn't work if it's only happening inside government agencies, which is why part of what has worked so well for America is to have this relationship where universities develop ideas. They do it often with federal support, and they develop it to the point that industry can pick it up and run with it. And I think that's true certainly in internet technology, artificial intelligence, the technology on everybody's mind right now, and it's absolutely true in every facet of transportation, not least some of the remarkable technologies that we've been able to see on display right here at this event.
So I know the last time you were here, you were telling me you were with President Biden, walking the floor, and you had a chance to walk earlier today. What's new and exciting? What do you? I'm going to have a chance to walk the floor later today, but anything stand out to you that you had a chance to see this morning?
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed the tour. Thanks to those who helped show off some of the great vehicles and products being developed, because it's kind of hard to, as much as I enjoyed my last time here, it's hard to enjoy a visit when you're close by to the President of the United States, who's obviously kind of setting the pace for the walk. So I was really amazed by the vehicles. I'm in the market now for a vehicle that can accommodate our 4-year-old twins. And thought about it as a dad, not just as somebody interested in industry. I will say, though, the other thing that I saw and heard speaking to each of the manufacturers who were displaying their incredible products was how much industry has had to contend with this whiplash from the policy side. Now, every administration is going to have its new priorities. That's to be expected. But just how existentially disorienting the changes have been in the last year, and how creative industry has had to be in trying not to obliterate the value of investments that they've already made, and also be responsive to the new policy environment, I think has, frankly, been a setback in many ways, both to the balance sheets and to the trajectories of some of our great OEMs, but also, I think, remains something that that these firms in this industry can manage in a way that sets up America for success in partnership with the workers who make all of this happen.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about global competition. And so if you think about, drawing a little bit from your experience as Department of Transportation Secretary, Michigan, we sit right here in the center of the global mobility transition, you might say. And right now, that transition feels both urgent yet unstable. From electric vehicles to batteries to autonomous systems, there's intense global competition, particularly from China. So, from your vantage point, what will it take for the U.S. to hold and would like to say strengthen our position in its leadership in EV and advanced mobility research and development?
Well, first of all, the leadership of the automotive sector by rights ought to be on American soil, and it ought to be right here. And the question is, how do we make sure it stays that way? Because even though I say that's true by rights, it's actually not automatically true without a lot of intention and a lot of work. What's exciting to me is that a moment like this means we don't have to just be nostalgic about way back when new technologies exploded onto the scene. I grew up, I'm a child of the industrial Midwest. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, in the shadow of the former Studebaker Corporation. Studebaker, which would have had an amazing presence on the floor of this show had they survived 1963 when the last Studebaker rolled off the line, dominated the life of the city I grew up in, even though it had gone out of business 20 years before I was born. So when I saw the moments of greatest creativity, the greatest innovation, greatest transformation in the auto industry, I saw them in museums, and I saw them in history textbooks. Things that happened in the Haynes-Apperson days, things that happened at the dawn of the 20th century and in the middle of the 20th century. We don't have to have nostalgia right now, though, about the auto industry, because we are living in the most transformational moment for transportation since the combustion engine was developed in the first place. The question is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with that moment? And who is going to lead it? That's one of the reasons why I remain fired up about what's going on with EVs. And I say this recognizing that they are not for everybody right now. But when you have a technology that is ultimately more advanced, policymakers cannot just put the toothpaste back into the tube. There is no question about whether this technology will be the future of the sector. There is a big question about whether America will lead that. And I see the innovation, the determination, the dedication of U.S. automakers and their teams, their workers, and their leaders to make sure that is so. They deserve policymakers who have their back, because that very much is in question. I'm under no illusion that the Chinese Communist Party is enthusiastic about confronting climate change and about the finer points of environmental protection. So why have they invested so mightily in these new technologies? Well, it's economic security. It's economic strength. And should we do the same, we can own the 21st century just as much as we did the 20th century. But it won't happen on its own. Now, I've seen remarkable developments both in the technology and in the marketing just even in what was presented on the floor today around EVs. But you mentioned the other great technological development that is not being talked about as much in this context, which is automated vehicles. In my view, we have now very clearly reached the point where a typical automated vehicle that's on the road today is safer than you or I would be behind the wheel. We can talk, professional drivers is another story, but most of us average drivers, and by the way, the average driver believes that they are safer than the average driver, is in fact not safer than these spooky things that are going around on the road. Now, right now, when you see one of these, usually, what you're seeing is a regular car retrofitted to have a robot brain. But of course, there's no good reason why the car should have the shape that it does if there's not going to be a driver. And so the future is not going to be cars that look like the cars that we know. Not only are they physically going to be different, the ownership proposition is going to be different. I would anticipate a lot of two-car households, maybe not getting rid of their cars, but becoming one-car households. Because if you know that a car can just be asleep out in the county somewhere, and you don't have to own it, and it wakes itself up at 3 in the morning and comes in and picks you up and takes you to school or work or wherever you need to go, are you going to continue to have the second most valuable thing you own be an object that sits in your driveway and that you don't use 96% of the time? And for a lot of people, the answer is no. So driving as a service is going to become more important. So that transformation, land use will be different if that in turn means that less surface parking is required. These are developments that are tectonic. Now, I know that the widespread use of automated vehicles, which is 7 years away, has been 7 years away for 10 years. There's a grain of salt around all the predictions that have been made about this stuff. But still, I think we are underestimating the change that could happen in the medium term and need to be more proactive about preparing for it. And that's largely a question of the policy world keeping up with the research, keeping up with the technology, and keeping up with industry, which, as of today, I would argue it is not.
We talked a little bit about that earlier, and that the evolution of whether it's EV or autonomous vehicles is so rapid, and we're criticized in academia, higher education, as being a lot of inertia and things happen slowly. But say a little bit about that. How is policy and the changes keeping up with the pace of that evolution, whether it's EV or autonomous AI, being introduced into this?
Well, I'll give you a simple example. When we were overseeing updates to the FMVSS, the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards that every car ought to conform to, I noticed that we were prescribing exactly how you ought to have your rear view mirror set up in a driverless car. We have language in the standards that talks about passenger side in a car where everybody's a passenger. Right. And that's just one example of the kind of hangover that exists when things get entered into regulatory text. And there's a long notice and comment cycle, right? Many of the automakers have chafed at the way that recalls work when an over-the-air software update recall is maybe a different proposition than a hardware replacement recall. But of course, safety has to come first, and whatever changes you make have to be ones that add and not subtract to the level of the standard of safety that we have. And then there's Congress. Let's just say that a lot of the people making decisions about technology in our country, I fear, do not understand the technologies that they are regulating or proposing to make decisions about. And that's a real challenge. And ultimately, in any democratic society, that comes down to what people expect from their leaders, including a level of literacy around these technologies that are going to shape so much about our day-to-day lives, not to mention our economy.
That's great. I talk often about convergent science, the importance of not working in silos. And so as we think about the evolution of let's just say, autonomous vehicles, that it's going to only work probably when we bring together engineers, economists, planners, computer scientists, policymakers working together and probably educating those that will be the ultimate policy makers, decision makers, and Congress, et cetera. But what role do you think higher ed and our leading research universities should have in participating in this?
Well, it's indispensable. I mean, I would argue that the with the possible exception of wastewater, the university is probably the most consequential invention of the human species because it makes so many other things possible. And in our society right now, it is the role of higher education not just to produce educated workers, but to produce prepared citizens and the research that is going to take us to the bleeding edge of so many of these fast-changing spaces. But that means a couple of things for that really to lead to better policy decisions. One is, I think, a better level of interaction between the political or policy world and universities. It can't always be about the latest ideological battle. Or to put it another way, and I'll try to say this in a way that doesn't get you in trouble, but when you get a phone call from Washington as a university president in America, 99 times out of 100, it should not have anything to do with some kind of culture war or partisan fight. It should have to do with how we can team up in order to make sure that America stays in the lead. What resources do you need in order to be able to do your job? And what, in the judgment of our leaders, do the American people need from our academy in order to get things done? But I also think academia has a responsibility to show itself to be interested in things that are relevant to people. And I don't just mean STEM. I mean in the humanities and philosophy. Can we be sure that that things develop in a way that matter to the American people, that matter in some real world sense, or that can be connected through some long, and it may be a very long connection of dots, into the kinds of things that we can make sense of in a more day-to-day life. And that kind of orientation leads to a level of trust that I think can lead to people in the academic world getting their calls returned a little more responsively when they do need something from Washington or from their state houses.
That's great. I've probably spent more time in Washington, D.C. this past year than I have in in the previous 7, 8 years as a university leader. And so I'm going to bring you with me the next time when I go to D.C. You'll come with me.
You might think twice before you do that in today's D.C., but...
I'll place a bet on you. You come with me. Let's talk a little bit about preparing. And let me just say, we are going to open it up the last 10, 12 minutes to anybody that wants to come up and ask questions. So be thinking about that. But let's talk a little bit about preparing the next generation of workers, for jobs and careers that maybe don't even yet exist today. I was at a Business Leaders of Michigan meeting probably a little over a year ago with Bill Ford, the chairman of Ford Motor, and who I know was here yesterday, I believe. But he said that nearly half of his workforce is concerned about losing their jobs because of AI and machine learning and all the new advances. And he said we're counting on America's leading research universities like Michigan State to help solve this problem and to help retool the current workforce while also preparing the younger and next generation. Any thoughts on that? Over 1.2 million jobs in our state are tied to the auto sector. So what should we be doing? What are we not doing that we should be doing as we think toward the future?
Well, the most important thing, in my view, is to invest in forms and ways of knowledge that are flexible and adaptable. Just think 20 years ago, a lot of people were being thrown out of work in manufacturing and were told, often by well-intentioned government-funded training programs, to pivot and go into coding. Coding is now one of the skills that is most in danger of displacement by AI. And if we keep trying to chase things kind of one narrow skill set or one industry at a time, we may miss an opportunity to equip workers as well as citizens to be ready for whatever the changes are that are going to come. Of course, people will continue to train in very highly specialized ways all the way up to terminal degrees at our universities. But the more we can do that in ways that are also going to serve them well when they do have to make a mid-career change, which, by the way, in the era of AI is coming at the white-collar workforce in a way that I think is unprecedented, and that the only precedent for comes from what was experienced in the blue-collar workforce at various moments between the original industrial revolutions and the late 1990s and early 2000s. It's going to be more important than ever to do that.
That's great. I want to thank you for serving, in the Navy, in the U.S. Navy, and so you are a veteran, and so we're grateful for your service. I understand that you had to do some driving in very dangerous situations during that time. maybe a whole new perspective and, on the automobile, one that needs to protect or engage in military situations. So I'm just curious, how that experience in the Navy, living overseas, perhaps impacted or informed your decision-making as a leader, as our Secretary of the Department of Transportation.
Well, yeah, my big part of my responsibility was to drive my commanding officer and sometimes military equipment around the city of Kabul and between Kabul and Bagram on a road that at the time had a lot of IEDs. And I came back with a very different perspective. First of all, on driving, I will never complain again about drivers anywhere in America after experiencing a roundabout with counterflow. So you actually have to know whether you're going clockwise or counterclockwise, mostly based on eye contact with other drivers, which is kind of the Kabul, or was the Kabul way of doing things. I remember coming home and, by the way, I wasn't driving MRAPs or Humvees. We were driving Land Cruisers that were just up armored. And I almost ripped the door of my Ford Taurus off of its handle because I'd formed the habit, the muscle memory, of yanking just to be able to get the door open. And I think I surprised the hell out of my mother the first time I was driving with her, and we were pulling onto I-80, and I just said, "Clear right?" And she looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" So it definitely made me a different kind of driver. More generally, the biggest thing I took away from that experience was the importance of trust. We would get into a vehicle, and we'd be going outside the wire, and the people getting in the vehicle with me did not care if I was a Democrat or a Republican. They did not care if I was going home to a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They did not care what country my dad immigrated from. They just want to know if I was ready to do my job, and that's what I want to know about them. Had you studied the route? Did you know what to do if we thought there was an IED? Are we going to get through this evolution together? Even when we had nothing in common really besides the flag on our shoulder. Sometimes on the handshake, you would have to trust somebody with your life. And, in a way, that's a metaphor for where we're at as a country. Nothing works without trust, even the most basic things. I mean, if that sounds like an extreme or exotic consideration, consider the fact that every time you're at a green or a red light, you are making a life or death decision to trust your personal survival to a whole bunch of people that you've never met, because your survival depends on whether everybody follows the same convention of the stoplight. Nothing works without trust. And as a country, as a society, we obviously have some deficits in social and political trust that need to be quickly healed if we are going to function, let alone lead in the 21st century.
That's great. So since we're talking trust, let's talk tariffs. And at what point, in your opinion, does trade policy stop being leverage and start becoming drag?
Well, we're clearly there. And look, I'm not a fundamentalist about this. I was part of an administration that believed that tariffs, when used in a targeted way, could be an important part of industrial policy and trade policy. But what we have now is not that. As an objective matter, tariffs have failed to deliver an increase in manufacturing employment in this country this year. Matter of fact, over the last year, manufacturing employment has gone in the wrong direction. I could tell a similar story about the trends in manufacturing investment. You would think if we did a dramatic, radical, disorienting, pro-domestic manufacturing policy move, you would at least continue and hopefully beat the level of manufacturing employment and growth that we'd seen. And instead, the reverse happened. It's gone the wrong way over the last year. And yet, there's one thing that tariffs do directly, immediately, by definition, which is increase the price of everything that we pay, everything that we buy that's imported and everything that goes into a supply chain. Sometimes it even increases the prices of things that are not imported because of the effect that it has on global markets. So here you have a policy that has not led to improved manufacturing employment in the U.S. and has led to upward pressure on prices at a time when affordability is the biggest economic problem that most people are living. In that sense, the tariff policy has objectively been a failure. And I think the reason for that is that the purpose of the tariff policy, in the particular way it was implemented, was mostly to concentrate power in the hands of the White House. Again, this was not the result of a carefully thought through economic strategy that said, okay, here's how exactly the right combination of tariffs could lead to dealing with market imbalances. Instead, it was designed, and in this measure it was a success, to create a situation where a major element of the economic policy of the world's most important economy is up to one guy. And it turns out, in that situation, the best thing you can do for your company, your industry, or your country is to get on that one guy's good side, if you can, even if it means doing something that is not in the interests, in the long term, of your country, your industry, or your company. And so that's what's happened. There's been selective relief, selective punishment, none of it guided by an actual economic vision, which is why, at risk of repeating myself, we find right now that manufacturing employment is down and China's trade surplus is at an all-time high.
So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, innovation for rural communities and smaller cities. Transportation infrastructure shapes economic opportunity. We often think about infrastructure as roads and bridges, but as a tool for equity and community connection. I should say not just as roads and bridges, but also as a tool for equity and community connection. So a little bit about that, and then your thoughts about rural areas. We oftentimes think about transportation in large metropolitan areas, but let's think about the needs of smaller cities, more rural areas. So I guess it's a two-part question.
I think what we got to remember is that our infrastructure is so much more than just a means for propelling something. Infrastructure, as many workers reminded me during my time as secretary, for a lot of people, infrastructure is their workplace. And for a lot of us, infrastructure is also, in a way, our home or our neighborhood. So if your small business or your home is on a streetscape that can effectively and efficiently move vehicles and also safely move pedestrians and bicycles, that's conducive to business and it's conducive to a good quality of life. If, on the other hand, it is hostile to pedestrians or makes it more difficult to actually get around, then it's having the opposite effect. So I think we always need to remember, even though I'm an infrastructure nerd in many ways, the risk of thinking about infrastructure as being for its own sake, and the importance of remembering with any infrastructure choice, why? Why invest in this infrastructure? Why have this instead of that? The other thing I'd say is that our infrastructure reflects the modernity of a country. And to go right, it has to be adapted to what people need in that moment, in that decade. This is where it gets hard, because infrastructure decisions often last for 50 years or 100 years, and it's hard to make a 100-year decision knowing how much is going to change in the next 10. But we've learned a lot, including things we learned by making mistakes in the history of this country, that can inform us making better decisions going forward. And that does need to be done in a way that reaches everybody, whether that's a low-income neighborhood, a neighborhood that was on the wrong end of patterns of discrimination in the past, a lot of rural areas that have seen higher rates of fatalities and crashes, for example, partly because of inferior infrastructure. There's a chance to do something about that. We tried to do that on my watch. We invested billions in rural infrastructure and in safety improvements from our infrastructure so that it was better suited to the lives that people are actually living and not just something that seemed neat on a planner's sketch pad somewhere.
Great. So before we take a few questions, circling back a little bit to public policy, how can public policy best support the innovation while still allowing ideas to be tested, whether these are in large cities and metropolitan areas or the rural ones, smaller communities that we talked about? How can they best be tested, challenged, and scaled through partnerships like the ones that are represented here today?
One thing that I think really helps is to look beyond the federal as if it was the only policy that matters. I think my feelings about federal policy are well known, and I've just shared some of them. But you mentioned the importance of testing new ideas. Often the best place and way to do that is a little closer to home. in South Bend when I was mayor, we prided ourselves on being a city that was just big enough to taste just about every big city problem, but small enough that you could be very entrepreneurial in how you dealt with it. You could try different things. There are even ideas like what is called tactical urbanism. That's where you go in with bales of hay or a little bit of paint instead of a multi-million-dollar concrete deployment to try to see if a new pattern of traffic, let's say, works as well as you think it will before you actually do it for real. And many of the best examples of that I've seen are partnerships with universities. You and I were speaking before we came on stage about the Research Triangle in California, in North Carolina, and the remarkable work that was done to kind of fit the research of the universities to the life of the communities. I would love to see more universities and communities partner, hopefully with government support. Certainly you need an open-minded mayor or local government to try to do this sort of thing, to be the test beds for some of these great ideas. Because you only really know how great an idea is when you try it somewhere in particular. And so many of the most interesting discoveries, especially in transportation, have actually come not from some grand initiative from the top down, but from really creative work happening from the bottom up.
Right. We're doing that on our campus. We have a faculty member in engineering that's looking at bendable concrete. He's created this, and we're testing it on a small sidewalk, and Governor Whitmer is excited about it because she thinks that this might help us finally fix those damn roads.
I love it. You know, the sworn enemy and prey of every mayor is the common American pothole. And this may not be the sexiest topic in U.S. transportation, but if you think about how much money we spend paving and resurfacing, if you can extend the life of a road by 1 year, it is ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars of savings if you did that across the entire road system.
Agreed. All right, so who's up first? We got a question. Come on up to the mic and welcome. Maybe tell us your name and your industry, and I'm sure that Secretary Buttigieg is ready for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Madonna Van Fossen. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for the Detroit People Mover. The noise you hear every once in a while are our trains going through the Huntington Place station. So two things. When do you want to ride? I've got time today. It's a 15-minute drive. Are you familiar with the People Mover?
Oh, yeah.
Been around for 38 years this year. Yeah. Next, in 27, it'll be 40 years, so we're very excited about this. But, so seriously, if you have any time today, I'll take you around 15 minutes. And second question is, will you run again, please?
Okay. So the answer to the second question is I don't know. And on the first, I have taken the People Mover, and it's a good occasion to mention how important transit is in this picture. And I think we need to break this idea that you can either care about cars or you can care about transit. Transit benefits everybody. It benefits the people who use it. It also benefits the people who don't because there's less competition for limited roadways when there's less congestion. You just cannot pave your way out of the congestion that we face in so many environments. And one thing I'm especially excited about in this technological moment is the use of things like GPS and smartphones to extend transit to places where the density just would not have made for it. And the places that aren't as dense as Detroit, that could never justify building something like the People Mover, but do deserve some kind of transit that might be enabled with automated vehicles or in some other way. And so I think there could be, a bit counterintuitively, I think the latest developments in the automotive sector could actually lend themselves to some pretty exciting things happening in transit in the next 10 and 20 years. But thanks for what you do.
I want to say we have been automated for 38 years. We're driverless trains, so come on and ride us. Let me know when you're in town again and we'll take you out.
Sounds good. Thank you.
President Guskowitz, Secretary Buttigieg, thank you. Jessica Robinson, I'm a partner at Assembly Ventures. We invest in early stage mobility technology companies based here in Detroit. Secretary, you commented on politicians passing regulation for technology that they don't understand. I'm curious the flip side, which is in your experience in politics over the years, what is something that politicians do understand that you wish the general American public could grasp sooner?
Well, I think that the specialty of at least a good politician is to channel where people actually are, what they're ready for, not what your theory says they ought to be ready for, but what they're actually ready for. And that can be true in some of the complexities of public health, between what a doctor would say everybody ought to do and what people are actually going to be capable of doing. That's also true in terms of transportation. The readiness to adopt technologies from electrification to automation. Another thing that we spend a lot of time studying in a sort of analytical way that frankly we're all as a public just totally irrational about is safety. Consider the intensity that we bring to aviation safety, and rightly so. So much so that when a door plug blew out of an airplane and somebody could have gotten hurt, you might remember this a couple of years ago, we reconsidered our entire oversight framework because somebody could have gotten hurt. But we also went about 4 billion passenger enplanements with 0 airline crash fatalities on my watch. Today, about enough people will lose their lives on America's roads to fill a 737. And that happened yesterday, and it's going to happen tomorrow. It got a little bit better in our 4 years. We've got a long way to go. But as people, we just somehow don't take it as seriously. And when an automated vehicle does something stupid, that's national news, even though some guy did the exact same stupid thing yesterday, and it's not, right? So I think especially with so much at stake in terms of safety, the relationship between safety and technology is a good place to look at. Maybe not so much what politicians know that the public doesn't, but what do we know rationally that we don't quite feel yet as consumers or as voters, and how do we work through that? Thanks.
Hi, Liam Rapley with the Detroit Free Press. Mr. Buttigieg, what's your opinion about the suspension of a Ford employee after shouting at President Trump yesterday while he toured their plant?
Well, I don't know much about the HR side of it. What I know is that President Trump did literally what I believe he's been doing figuratively for some time, which is give auto workers the finger. Look, he's been a union buster. He has presided over the loss of manufacturing jobs in this country. And then when somebody sees someone as powerful as him come into their workplace, he gives them the old FU. In some ways, it's just in character for him to be that way. And obviously, my sympathies are with the worker and not the president.
Thank you. Will Rayom with Our Detroit Magazine. Secretary Buttigieg, so it kind of feels like the Trump administration is largely kind of controlling the narrative surrounding EV. What do you feel like automotive leaders can do to kind of change that conversation and more effectively work with the current administration?
Well, I don't know what the administration actually cares about, but what the administration claims to care about is American leadership in this industry. And if that's the case, I would love to see industry pushing the president instead of the other way around on what really needs to happen. Billions of dollars of value were wiped out and written off due directly to a policy change that didn't have to happen. And I get that, this is an administration that will never be willing to subsidize clean energy in the same way that it subsidizes legacy energy. That just is what it is. But it could at least do this in a way that is less disruptive to companies that often plan their product on about a 4-year cycle, which is just, I don't know how they can keep doing that when there's this much political volatility in our country. Of course, a new administration from a different party is going to have different priorities. We all get that. But I think industry can and should, especially if it sticks together. Look, universities have done best in standing up to inappropriate pressure when they stick together. Legislators have done the best at standing up to inappropriate pressure when they stick together. I'd love to see industry do the same thing when they know that they are ready to lead us forward. Because otherwise, I got to tell you, one of the things being a private citizen last year is I spent more time traveling internationally than I have in a long time. And you can go to these other countries and you can see those Chinese EVs all over the road. And I want America to be leading the way in that global auto market for the rest of my life. And it's not going to happen. Put it another way. The president cannot stop electric vehicles from advancing to become the leading automotive technology. But he can stop America from being the leader in that technology. Industry should point a different direction.
So we've got about 3 minutes left, so we're going to take a couple quick ones.
I'll try to be concise.
No, you're good. You're doing great. But I just want to let folks know that we're kind of running out of time.
Hey, Mayor Pete, Ned Fennell, professional EV charging nerd. I'm curious, what technologies do you feel optimistic about, old or new, automotive or otherwise, to providing the transportation needs that we have in America in our unique moment that are actually practical to implement, that you feel like we can do this?
Well, I do feel, as I said earlier, optimistic about actually new possibilities that technology can bring for the handshake between transit and the cars or other vehicles that are single occupancy. I think that we're not great at guessing what technologies will make the biggest difference. After all, the biggest transportation technology of this century, in terms of how much it changed our everyday lives, isn't EVs, it isn't AVs, it's the smartphone. It's not even a vehicle, right? And it can be hard to gauge how those things will make a difference. But take AI, which is another example of a general purpose technology, which surely will change transportation in more ways than we can yet guess. But all of the things that can come, the thing I care about most and the thing we should care about most, I think, as a country, is safety. We cannot continue to tolerate 40,000 people a year dying on our roads. It's on par with gun violence. It's not normal. It's worse in the US than it is in peer countries. And in my view, it's preventable. And technology is part of how we get that done. There's good old-fashioned technologies like trains, right? Japanese bullet trains were developed in the 1960s. We should be keeping pace. This is not, I know I'm at the auto show. This is not an anti-car proposition, right? The countries that have the best trains often have the most lively automotive sectors and markets too. It's just that they ought to fit together. The biggest example I'd point to is airports. Getting from an airport to a city center in this country is an embarrassment compared to what it is in most places. We could do something about that, using technology and public investment to better integrate transit with roadways. Thanks.
Dave Spencer with Fox 2 News here in Detroit. And you're probably aware that the president was in the city yesterday visiting with Ford, went to a plant. I spoke with Bill Ford Jr. last night at the event, and he said anytime a sitting president comes in, we're going to welcome him. It's a good thing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I know what it's like to run a city, and I don't know what it's like to be chairman of an automotive company. But of course, when the President of the United States wants to talk, you're going to pick up the phone. I just regret that the president doesn't seem inclined to listen. I mean, the president came to this city and told people basically not to believe their lying eyes in terms of the prices that they're paying, in terms of what's actually going on in our manufacturing sector. If a country is losing manufacturing jobs and a president wants to come in and say he's got manufacturing off the charts, people aren't going to believe him, and people don't. That's a problem. That's not Bill Ford's problem. That is a problem of the relationship between the president and the people, and it's one that the people, I think, are going to have a lot to say about.
Great. Let's take one more question.
Okay. Paul Eisenstein with the Nikkei, Headline News, a lot of other folks. You talked about policy changes. Bill Ford last night when I spoke to him said one of the things that worries him is going from administration to administration, party to party. We've done that much faster in recent decades than we had in the past. How does the party that comes in 2028, should it be a changing party, how do they come up with something that meets your goals but also avoids having the volatility that causes the auto industry to start writing off tens of billions of dollars in completely shifting plans and potentially becoming less competitive?
Yeah. Well, I think if it's my party, there will be a fork in the road. I think the fork in the road is here, actually, for my party. And the party needs to decide what it's about. And it can go one of two ways. It can either be about reversing everything that this administration did, which is a recipe for more volatility, or it can be about something completely different. In other words, our mission cannot be to simply rewind the clock. I am passionately opposed to most of the things this administration is doing, as you might imagine. That doesn't mean I'm going to go around saying everything ought to be just the way it was in 2024, or for that matter, 2014. If things were going along just fine, institutionally, in this country, politically, economically, socially, if things were going along just fine, we wouldn't be here. So my party needs to have the imagination to take the departure of this president not as the be-all, end-all goal of our existence, but as the beginning of the question of what has to come next. And interestingly, I actually see more people in the president's own party, as they reject some of his pressure, starting to picture the political landscape of this country after he leaves, which he will. They seem to be better at having that imagination than my party right now, but cultivating that imagination is one of the things I'm working on every day.
What would the changes be? What would you do if you're not going back, but you also reject what he's doing that affects the auto industry today? What would you see?
Well, I do think that we need, if we are, as a country, supporting one mode of energy, which we always have on the fossil side, we ought to at least as robustly be supporting clean approaches. We also, though, need to work with industry to see where the gaps are in what the market can produce. So, for example, on EVs, federal government now, I mean, is one thing in basic research, things going on at DARPA, but now, you don't really need the federal government to directly make batteries better all day. But it's very clear that charging networks, which are kind of the Achilles heel of EV adoption in this country, won't quite get to where they need to be without subsidies and supports, because there are some areas where the system needs them, but no individual player can find that it pencils out economically to put them in, right? Which is the whole idea of the NEVI program, which, interestingly, even though it's literally a clean energy transmission or clean energy charging program, this administration has not gotten around to killing, probably because it's so important to so many people. So this doesn't have to be completely, we do this, we do that, we do this. But what I think it does mean is a predictable roadmap where, if possible, government locks in its investment with at least as much commitment as the OEMs have to make when they're making huge decisions, sometimes betting the whole company on a course of action.
Okay, so with that, we have to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank Secretary Buttigieg for being with us today. I want to thank you for being a proud resident of the great state of Michigan, living outside of Traverse City, and I have a strong suspicion we're going to be seeing a lot more of you. So with that, thank you so much.
Seems like all you hear these days is Detroit did this, Detroit did that. As you should. It's about time we got our flowers. Because this, all of this, it ain't new. We've been on, doing the most, making our city shine bright for all to see. And now, all eyes are on Detroit. We are the all-American icon. And it's time we own that. Hospitality, we take it to new heights. Leisure, nobody got it like us. Sports, we change the game again and again. So let's keep going, because we're Detroiters. We never settle. We're never satisfied. And this, well, it's just the beginning.